You'll have plenty of time. I want you taking these notes down. So if you need help looking, I want you to get these notes down anyway. So later. Huh?
What'd you say?
Get the rest of the notes down later sometime.
Okay.
Miss Compton. Okay.
I don't know Miss Compton.
Oh, yeah, Miss Mark. Sorry. Okay, so let's look at 12. If I look at 12, I have the absolute value of W minus 8 equals negative 5. The first thing you need to notice is that this is absolute value. So you cannot treat it like a normal equation. Every year, guys, keep your heads up, please. We have a couple more to do. Every year, I see kids just do W minus 8 equals negative 5 and solve this equation like normal. This is absolute value. You cannot do that. If you see absolute value, you're thinking you're probably going to get how many answers? 2. Okay? So as I look at this, I need to go through the steps. The first step is to isolate the absolute value. Guys, keep your head up. We're only doing a couple more examples, please. Colton, head up, please. Thank you. So first thing you need to do is you need to isolate the absolute value. As I look at 12, what that means is get rid of any number that is outside the absolute value sign. So as I look at 12, what number is outside the absolute value sign? Negative 8. Now you treat this just like a normal equation. If I have a negative 8, how do I move that over to the other side? Add 8. Okay? So you treat it like a normal equation. It's a negative 8, so I add 8. You have to get the absolute value isolated first, which means everything on the outside needs to move over to the other side. I still have the absolute value of W. Do not, this is where a point where I see a lot of mistakes. Do not lose the absolute value. The only way I lose the absolute value is by making my two equations.
Why is it Y? It's a Y.
Sorry. There you go. Y. So, do not lose the absolute value when you add 8.
What the heck is that?
Okay? So, the absolute value of Y, guys, listen up. Absolute value of Y equals negative 5 plus 8, which is 3. So, I get everything away from it first. And now, this is just like we did on the first page, which you guys did well on the homework. Now, you have the absolute value isolated. There's nothing on the outside. So I do what next? Y equals 3. Y equals negative 3. Split, take the inside part and set it equal to a positive number and a negative number. So Y equals 3 and Y equals negative 3. The next step is to solve these equations. Well, they're already Y equals. They're already solved. So my solution set would be Y equals the set, which is the fancy bracket, of negative 3, comma 3. So these were already solved because they were already Y equals. So you just have to get rid of the stuff, the numbers, outside the absolute value first before you split it into 2. Okay, let's look at 14. Okay, first step. First of all, I notice absolute value bars, so you're both thinking 2 answers. First thing I need to do is I need to isolate the absolute value. This is a negative 2 if you can see it. You can see it in your paper. How do I get rid of that negative 2?
Add it.
Now, here's some mistakes I've seen. First of all, I've heard distribute. These are not parentheses. These are absolute value bars. You cannot distribute. Okay, so don't distribute. Also, I also heard add to. Think about this. Guys, listen up. This is negative 2 times the absolute value. This is not minus 2. So if it's negative 2 times the absolute value, how do I get rid of the negative 2? Divide by negative 2. So I know this stuff, you're not super familiar with absolute values, but you use the same techniques that we kind of did with equations. These are not parentheses. You cannot distribute. Guys, divide by negative 2. On the left, what do I have left? Absolute value of z plus 3. You do not lose the absolute value unless you split it into your 2 equations. So you still have the absolute value. Negative 14 divided by negative 2? Positive 7. Now, are there any numbers outside the absolute value? No. So you take your inside part, set it equal to a positive 7, and take your inside part, z plus 3, and set it equal to a negative 7. And now we have 2 equations that we know how to solve. Now, you only lose the absolute value when you split it into 2. Okay, how do I solve this? John, come on. Can you stay with me? Minus 3, z equals 7 minus 3? 4. So solve both equations. You know how to do that. Minus 3, Negative 7 minus 3?
Negative 10.
Negative 10. You're good. Negative 10. And then write it as a solution set. Z equals, fancy brackets, negative 10, comma, 4. Okay. Any questions? Okay, let's look at 16. Guys, seriously. I'm in the middle of talking. If I look at 16, what is different about 16 than the ones we just did? There's more on the left side. There are two numbers that are outside the absolute value. So the first step is to isolate the absolute value. So I need to get rid of the negative 10 and the negative 3 because they are both on the outside of the absolute value. Think about normal equations. Do I get rid of negative 10 first or negative 3? Negative 3 because it's furthest away. How do I move that minus 3 over? Add 3. So if there's more than one number, you do it like a normal equation and get rid of the one that's furthest away. So I add 3. Start from the left. I still have negative 10 times the absolute value of h plus 5. We do not lose the absolute value because I haven't split it into two equations. I add 3. The 3 cancels. I bring down that equal sign. Negative 83 plus 3. Negative 80. So kind of the big idea is the same as like a normal equation, except you have to split it into two. Now, is the absolute value isolated yet? Is the absolute value isolated?
No.
No, what's still outside it?
10.
How do I get rid of that negative 10 times the absolute value of h plus 5?
Plus 10.
No, it's negative 10 times.
Divide by
Divide by negative
negative 10.
10. So divide both sides by negative 10. Colton, you getting this down? Colton,
He's out.
wake up. Keep your head up, please. So divide by negative 10. Left side, the negative 10 cancel. I still have the absolute value. You only lose the absolute value when you split it into your two equations. Negative 80 divided by negative 10. 8. Okay? Is the absolute value finally isolated? Are there any numbers outside the absolute value? No. So now, what do I do?
You set it to negative or positive?
Yep, take the inside, h plus 5, and set it equal to a positive 8, and take h plus 5 equal to a negative 8. And I lose the absolute value when I split it into 2. So I've lost the absolute value. Now we have two simple equations you know how to solve. Minus 5, h equals 3. Minus 5, h equals negative 8 minus 5. Negative 8 minus 5.
Yeah, negative 8 minus
Huh?
13.
Negative 13. So your bracket is going to look like h equals
3.
fancy bracket negative 13, comma 3. Okay.
Okay, can we just be done now?
No, I want to look at least one more. Let's look at one more. Okay, so let's go ahead and look at number, we'll look at number 17. Let's look at 17. Okay, let's look at 17. So, first of all, I notice I have those vertical lines. Those are absolute values. So I know I will probably have how many answers? 2. Anytime you see absolute value bars in an equation, you'll probably have 2 answers. Do not just treat it like a normal equation. Okay, so as I look at this, we need to get the absolute value isolated. So we need to get rid of the numbers on the outside. The 7 and the negative 6 are outside. Which one do I get rid of first? The negative 6. How do I move that negative 6 over? I add 6. So get your work to get your absolute value by itself by getting rid of the numbers on the outside. So add 6. Start from the left. 7 times the absolute value of 4n plus 8 equals, what is 106 plus 6? 112. You're good. 112. Okay. Is the absolute value isolated yet?
No.
No. How do I get rid of that 7?
Divided by 7.
Divide by 7. It's 7 times the absolute value, so we divide by 7. On the left, 7 cancels. I still have the absolute value because I did not split it into 2. You only drop the absolute value when you split it into 2. Also, double check, just kind of check your vertical bars, because I almost thought this was 81, but this is 8 with a vertical absolute value. So the absolute value of 4n plus 8 is equal to 112 divided by 7, 16. Now, there's no numbers outside the absolute value. It is isolated, so what do?
You split it up.
Okay, how?
Take 4n plus 8, and then the other side 4n plus negative.
4n plus 8 equals
16?
positive 16, and you lose the absolute value because you're making your two equations. And then 4n plus 8 is equal to
Negative.
negative 16. So split it into equal to a positive and a negative. That's when you lose your absolute value. And then solve those two equations like I know how to do. Minus 8 first. 4n, 16 minus 8. 8. Divide by 4. N equals 2. So once you split it into 2, these are pretty straightforward equations. The second one, minus 8, minus 8. 4n equals negative 16 minus 8. Negative 24. Use a calculator if you need help. Divide by 4. N equals negative 6. And then write your brackets. N equals negative 6, comma 2. Any questions on these? Okay, so the rest of the time is yours to finish the homework. Okay, the rest of the homework are going to be ones where you have to get stuff away from the outside.